I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
So we're back with my second guest, dear friend, someone I admire and respect, Mr. Dan Leffingwell, baby.
What's up, brother?
If you're in Ohio and you're an educator, you're a coach, you know this guy, right? He was the Ohio State Superintendent of the Year. He's worn many hats. So why don't you tell the people a little bit from your first, all the jobs you've had, where you started and the roles you played?
Well, my degree coming out of Marietta College in 1988 was English and special education. I spent a few years teaching special education, specifically what's now called ED. Loved that. So I think my teaching career was much more of a social worker than an academic, if you will. And from that, while I was doing that, I was coaching basketball. I've coached a lot, but spent most of my time on the basketball court, where we've crossed paths several times.
We have.
And had an opportunity early on to go into administration as an assistant principal, and spent 20 years as a high school principal, 10 years as superintendent. Worked a year at the ESC as Director of Innovation and Legislative Services. Now I'm working at Washington State Community College, really focused a lot on workforce development. So time flies, brother. 58 years old, staring at 60, don't know how I lived this long.
Nah, you've been a blessing to all people. But I will tell you this, it's ironic. I taught English and special ed, and my last year teaching, I had 2 to pass. I had 4 periods of in-unit ED, and I had 4 periods of AP Senior English, so I had the high and the low
Absolutely.
kids. A lot of diversity, right? Obviously, my relationship with you started with coaching and basketball, and tremendous amount of respect. But one of the things I think that made you a great coach, and people miss the boat, is to be a great coach, you have to be a great teacher. If you might know the game, but if you can't teach, you can't coach. You can be a manager, but to really in this game, if you can't teach, you can't. You'll be able to teach kids. All kids differentiate.
Well, and I think you coach and you teach kids from where they're capable of being, not necessarily where they are. And I think that's where that expectation piece comes into play, and it's so important.
I think more so today, as we're going to jump into this, obviously, there is a national crisis of teacher shortages. Guys like me and you are at the end of it. You're retired, right? You could stay and go any day, but it matters to you, right? And we want to see this thing continue to go. But before we get it, tell these guys why you got an education.
Well, growing up in West Virginia, it was all about sports. So obviously you were exposed to coaching, some good, some bad early on, but you realize the impact of coaching. So my draw into education was that through athletics and being a coach. English was just one of those things. One of my favorite teachers was an English instructor, right? And she was tough. And she was difficult. She was demanding. She had high expectations. So that's the class I actually enjoyed the most. That just seemed like the conversation. And what we know even today about choosing our career path, really we make those decisions largely on what we're exposed to. So athletics, coaching, teaching seem to go hand in hand, something I really liked. So, here we are. But, my main drive has not changed. I wanted to participate in improving life choices for the students in which we serve. And I think when we do that, we create a legacy that will last for generations long after we're gone. And I think we would all agree that different degrees of education don't have to be the same, but more education definitely gives you more options. So improving life choices for those we serve was really my motivator, and it remains so 36 some years later.
But it's evident because you wouldn't still be doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I love it.
Side note, I became an English teacher major because my senior English teacher, Mrs. Judy Robinson, if you're listening, Judy, she's obviously a role model mentor, but her husband was our superintendent too. And she impacted my life, and that's how I chose to route English. It's ironic that we have some similarities here.
That's right.
So, obviously there's, I said earlier, 75,000 vacancies across the country right now for teaching. There's another 270,000 filled by underqualified people. So some of the reasons they stated was, the first one, and you and I can probably laugh about this when we started, but the number one reason is low pay. And they state that it's not enough money for something that requires a professional license. You know, most professional licenses, doctor, attorney, pharmacist, you know, those type of things. Talk a little bit about, one, what low pay looked like when you and I started, right? And what's your thoughts on that moving forward?
Yeah, and I realize you're going to have different guests, different perspectives. So I want to preface everything with this is just one part of a perspective.
Right.
First of all, my first teaching job, including coaching 2 sports, I made $15,100, Fayetteville, Ohio. Bill Garrett hired me for my first job, and even in 1988, $15,100 a year was tough, right? So I do think low pay is a deterrent to many. But if you really think about the scale that we've all come to know, low pay is not as much an issue 25 years into your career as it is year number 1. So to me, the solution to that is how do we increase the beginning without doing so equally at the top? You know, it's an example of where we need to raise the floor without blowing out the ceiling. Because I think when you get later in your career, given the fact that most teacher contracts are 182 to 188
Absolutely.
days a year, you start looking at daily rates. That doesn't look so bad 20 plus years into the career. But year 1, you're probably qualifying for free and reduced lunch if you have a family. So how do we impact the bottom? And I think a whole nother show. I mean, I think that sometimes unions that support and really advocate for our teachers, some of their processes also
Absolutely.
exasperate these problems. So here's one thing I've always said: we don't expect anything less of a first-year teacher than we do the 25-year veteran. Yet we might pay them $30,000 less. It just makes no sense. You pay the job. It doesn't matter if you're a rookie or a veteran.
I talked with our first guest, Linda, about, the universities are going to have to look at, to me, I don't know why you need to go to a university to become a teacher. I mean, they ought to give the power to the school districts, right? And we hire these people and they work for us in different roles, and then like student teaching, when you and I had a student teacher, we would tell them whether they successfully completed that, right? Mm-hmm. You would build in, I think you have to have some flexibility and personalization from a district standpoint. Or if we keep doing what we're doing, where it's really going to be bad is the urbans. When these big urbans have no one to go educate kids, because as I talked earlier, I do believe that the educational model, and you can agree or disagree with me, is an old broken model for 8 hours a day and set up for daycare, right? What could you do for 8 hours that would be successful? We wouldn't practice basketball for 8 hours. Yeah. We wouldn't lift. You and I, our attention span, we couldn't go to a meeting for 8 hours.
The whole model that was on target for its time, the Industrial Revolution, has expired. It doesn't mean that all that was wrong. It's just not relevant for what we need and how we conduct business today. And we've been so slow to evolve.
So slow.
And I can say this now that I'm retired once, but still, you remember when Highly Qualified came out?
Yeah.
I was sitting at the principal's desk, or maybe I was an assistant principal then, and I just decided early in my career, I'm hiring the best that I have available.
Amen.
And so I have to tell you, I've never served a day in prison. I've never filled out anything with highly qualified, but I always hired the best people that I could find because I found that the right person was more important than the right piece of paper. And they deliver those relationships that we all want teachers to have with students. And then after the relationships established, typically the outcomes are on target. And, so I think we have to look at some of our policies. I found out something else that's interesting. Once upon a time, 30% of the school administrators in Ohio were previously retired.
Right.
But I found out a couple years ago at a national conference that Ohio was one of the few states, the minority of states, that actually allowed people to retire and reemploy with a full salary without a reduced benefit. So it didn't stop the bleed, but it certainly has helped slow the bleed. Right. So, I think continue to expand and look at some of those things and look at some of our policies and licensing procedures that are, like our system, antiquated.
My first year teaching was $16,400, right? And I coached 3 varsity sports, and I made almost the stipends them almost equal that, right? And this is a different subject, but when you talk about coaching, right? Well, back then, $3,500 to coach a sport was a lot of money, right? $3,500 a coach a day. You can't find coaches either. Because after taxes and you spend money on your own pocket, you lose money. But 25 years ago, $3,500 was a lot of money.
But just remember, Todd, it's not about the pay. It's about the prestige.
You're right. So with the low pay, I saw a thing on social media the other day, okay? And if the classroom, we'll just say that you take 30 kids in the classroom, all right? And I'm sure some are smaller or maybe even more than that, right? But if in a daycare, you charge $10 a kid per day, right? Or per hour.
Mm-hmm.
So if you did the math of 30 kids for 7.5 hours or 7.25 hours, a teacher would make $368,000 a year. Wow. So when you do just basically, and I think $10 an hour is pretty cheap for a daycare, right?
Oh yeah, we take that every day.
If you use that model, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously the way we're currently funded, we could never do that, and so I don't know. The problem is so complex. I don't know how you go to where we are to that, but we have to intentionally start filling that gap and bridging that gap the best that we can. Because obviously at $10 an hour, I remember what it was for daycare for my kids growing up, and I would have jumped all over that.
All over. So that's when I saw that. I'm like you. I realize that's based on how we're funded from the state. It's not feasible, but man, you start thinking like that. Like some of these people are better off to take 30 kids a day and do what they do and make
100%.
Right?
100%. And I think that's a shift you might see in the future. I mean, I think that's why the privatization and a lot of the charter and a lot of these things, it is people finding other ways. To make a profit. Absolutely. Versus a salary to do the same job and make more.
Let me ask this: do you ever envision? And maybe after you and I are long gone, do you ever envision? For you people out don't know, there's state funding that comes with each student. So and now it follows the student. So if you live here and you go to this district, it follows you. And now there's even vouchers in private schools, right? Do you ever envision a time where that set amount goes to the family and they figure it out where you want to send your kid?
I wouldn't rule anything out in today's world. And again, we can get upset with all those things, but I think eventually, right? So let's go back to coaching. Your team doesn't play well, and you get mad at Jimmy and Joe and Johnny and whomever.
I never do.
Okay, and then, yeah, I mean, well, and then you had the same performance. Poor performance a second consecutive time, and you're still a little upset. But you start to reflect a little bit more about what could I do differently as a coach. I think our system is so quick to point out, the bad about our competition instead of embracing. There's a certain part of us we need to embrace being the school of choice.
Absolutely.
I think obviously I am pro public school, no question about it. We could have a whole episode on why to choose public schools. But I also tell you that school of choice has made us better. Because if it were not for competing, we would never evolve. Right? So even though we're slow to evolve and we're slow to innovate, how slow would we be if we didn't have competition and other choice? And you think about that in the restaurant business. I own 3 sandwich shops. If I only offer one sandwich, I'm not going to be in business very long. And quite honestly, if I offered the most popular sandwich, I'd still go out of business. I have to offer variety. I have to personalize. I have to differentiate. I have to do things differently today than we did in 1960 or 50 or before. And we're slow to evolve. So as much as I don't like a lot of the choice, I do think we all benefit from choice because competition drives us to evolve in ways maybe we wouldn't do before.
Okay, so that's going to drive me to maybe a solution or an idea, right? Doesn't mean it'll be a good one. But we ask schools, just like teachers, right? But we ask schools to be a jack of all trades. We want you to be great in sports. We want you to be great in academically. We want you to be great in career readiness. We want you to be great in performing arts, all the extracurriculars, right? We want you to do all these things for all the. Well, how could you be great at 25 different things, right? So, in my mind, I think if schools were set up to only, sort of like we're at Foxfire, we serve at-risk youth, right? That's all we do. If you had
And you do a great job.
thank you. We got great people that for 20 years is 21 kids from 21 different districts come here, and they trust us. But I got a great board, great people that they're here for a purpose. You know, they understand what they're serving. But do you ever see the day of this school is a performing arts school? This is just for the athletes. This is your science. This is your engineering. This is your welding.
Well,
would that be a benefit?
I think that those things are always worth discussing, and that's it's a great thing, because what we're finding now, as you know, I've been heavily involved in STEM and workforce development for a number of years, and you talk about the teacher shortage. Teacher shortages in those career tech, those STEM areas are really difficult to find, because, quite frankly, their worth on the open market is 3 or 4 times. So I think then you get to the point: how do we share these specialized trainers? That's going to force us to learn how to pool resources and work together to provide things. You know, not everybody, for example, where I currently work, we have nearly $1.5 million robotics lab. Well, that's important to the future of our work, but we're the only lab like that in a pretty good sized region. But how do we create a structure where other people can share that? Well, here's an example of Slow to Evolve. So we have a program starting January 12th, next Friday. We're busing 80 students in from 10 different districts, and they're going to be able to earn workforce credentials using our labs on a day that we're closed. What's the biggest obstacle? Oh my gosh, you mean kids are going to miss 16 Fridays? How do we deal with that? Because we ring the bell every 42 minutes every day, brother.
It goes back to the model, right?
It goes back. The model no longer fits. So as we have to share, the teacher shortage is it's creating issues, obviously, numerous. But we only continue to try to fix it using the way things have always been done. And we have to think about, how can I address some of these issues through scheduling, sharing staff with my neighbor in an area where we can't find skilled instructors. We have to think beyond our borders and beyond our district.
But see, that is, and I'm not just stroking you. This is why we're the state superintendent. You are a solution-based guy, right? It's looking at this, okay, one, you can't ignore this. There's a shortage and it's a crisis, okay? What do coaches do? Like you said, we haven't played well. Well, we're bad on third down. Okay, well, what's the solution? What are we doing on first down? So we have to find, you come up with some solutions to address this, right? So now I'm going to go to the second reason where I think is more so than low pay. And this is just my perspective, right? 97% of educators left education stated due to an increase of disrespectful of student and parent behavior and a lack of support and discipline from districts.
Yeah, I'm probably as flexible. I think, I tell you what, I never had better relationships with students than when I worked as an assistant principal. And I can tell you the first year, the reason I got the job, I tell everybody, is because nobody else wanted it. Things had gotten that bad. It needed cleaned up. It was crazy, right? But I never developed greater relationships than I did as an assistant principal when I was administering discipline, handing out the penalty or the punishment. But for 30 some years, it never changed for me. There's 3 things that you can guarantee you're getting suspended for. That is, if you're a threat to harm yourself or others, you're disrupting the learning environment for yourself and others, or you commit a crime, a criminal offense. Those things to me were truly non-negotiable. Because I think we have to have standards. Absolutely. And be respect. If I can't have a conducive learning environment, then I've just destroyed the experience, not just for myself, but for everyone. And obviously, disrespecting educators and teachers and that goes right along the territory. And I think just having some consistent, boundaries for students. Students will typically rise to the expectation, but that expectation needs to be enforced consistently. And I think that removes the who somebody is versus what they did. Hey, you crossed the line here. This is the penalty, and we're consistent. And I think that is kind of like the golden rule, right? Treat others as you'd like Absolutely. To be treated, and just keep it simple. I know as a superintendent coaching principals, sometimes that was hard, right? Because we all, everybody that commits or violates one of those rules has a story.
Absolutely.
But learning as much through failure and a consequence as it is success. And then providing that, hey, I'm the guy kicking you out, but I'm also the guy that's going to help piece you together and bring you back and move you to success in the future. So I think that's really important. And I'll probably mention this a couple times. The disrespect sometimes is also a perceived thing that I think is personified and accelerated by our media. And an example I would give through our National Superintendents Organization, 86% of Americans more than approve of their experience of their students in public education.
86%.
86%. People are very happy with what's going on, but the media doesn't want to talk about that. Legislators don't want to talk about that. Most people approve of the job we're doing, but it's like so many things. We fixate on what we're inundated with in the media, social media, on the news, and those things. So it's never as bad as people make it out to be.
I would say that here we have 4 non-negotiables, and they're all over the walls and the buildings. I've seen an increase in the past 5 years. I don't want to blame COVID. I'm going to blame parenting, right? Of the way kids speak to adults or their lack of respect for them. However, like you said, adults have failed miserably in creating boundaries between adult and children in their own personal lives and what they expose them to. I mean, you can walk down the mall and someone's on their phone in front of their 3 kids and they're talking about their personal life and their kids hear it. We did not grow up in an era like that. So I do think there is an increase and there's a lack of a boundary or a barrier, filtration between adult. You know, you and I called everyone Mr. and Mrs. or Coach or Sir or Man, right? And I know times change. They call people by their first name and da-da-da-da-da. It goes, though, we do have some non-negotiables, and we had one where it was violated here recently, right? And I had to make a decision because when it gets to the superintendent level, you're the judge, okay? And like, you do some pre-sentence investigation. And I made a decision that I truly, like all of it, you hope this is in the best interest of everybody, the kid and I didn't discipline the way some of the people thought. And I said, you can feel that way. It's not that you're not supported, but you're not privy to know this, and this about the student. And then the mental health and well-being. And this kid is better here in this environment with people that love and care about them than they are not. So you don't always have to agree with it. But again, it's not always cut and dried, even though we have non-negotiable. So when they say there's a lack of support from schools, there's a human being involved too. And 100%. We're not God, but we try to do the best we can to make a decision that's truly in the best interest of the child and all children and everyone. And sometimes that means getting rid of them, right? Expel them, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's not a cookie cutter approach that Johnny's just out of here. I mean, because what you said earlier, the assistant principal job is the worst job, and that's a whole other podcast. The worst job in any building because you're the person who deals with this, you're the person who calls home. So you can take the name out, the name changes. The people, I hate Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so because they're calling home to tell you Johnny and Susie screwed up and they're suspended or whatever, and they're mad at them. But I do think that.
But I think when you have that job and you address that human side, I always found that if there was any room for me to give the first time, I like doing that. And I like to say, now understand, if Todd continues to act this way, at the end of the day, he's going to get second offense penalty. But I'm going to get, if I could give first, people, then you call the second time and you say, hey, we talked just yesterday. Todd's back in here today. I know what's going to happen. I think, it is still a human relationship. It's, the handbook doesn't drive our decision making. It serves as a guide, but it still comes back to having that human relationship.
So, again, this is probably a generational thing, or maybe not, but when you and I was in the principal's office a lot, I know you find that hard to believe, right? But when they called home, 1, I knew I was in big trouble, right? And 2, my parents weren't interested in any part of my side of the story. Mm-hmm. The teacher and coach called, or the principal, this way, and I got twice as bad. Well, now, today, kids do this. As they're going to the principal, hey, Mom, this teacher, she da-da-da-da-da-da. And that's a different element. And the parents, a lot of them will fight these battles for their children.
Yep.
You know, and as parents, you and I both know that all kids, including our own, make bad decisions.
Yeah, and something before we get away from this that you said initially, that I want to also just, it's just food for thought. I think it would also be interested in that stat. How did we define disrespect, right? Because sometimes a lack of engagement is considered disrespectful. If I fall asleep in class, does that fall under the realm of disrespect? Because I can tell you, we need to engage kids differently. And so a couple of things that we know that I've personally contributed a lot of time to, I think it has a lot of return on investment. Is a focus on strengths, a focus on aptitudes, the alignment of those to a career path. Because what we know, and Gallup has said that the engagement will increase 30% when two things exist. One, the school focuses on the strengths of its students. What do you mean the strengths of our students? Baby, I ring the bell every 42 minutes. It's my world. You come in. Well,
I don't know my students.
Now,
yeah, they're your students.
Why personalization and differentiation is so important is hopefully allowing that student to align their aptitudes and their strengths with the career that's best going to fit them and the pathway that's going to deliver that. And we'll see a 30% uptick. The second part of increasing engagement by 30%, as reported by Gallup, was I have just one teacher that excites me for my future. Now imagine on an 8-period day, if we had 7, 8, 5, 6, just one, right? So what's happened so oftentimes, students sometimes feel disrespect too, and they in turn come back at us in ways that we don't like. We're still trying to engage. Many of us in our profession still try to engage students as we were engaged. Well, we were engaged by force. You're going to engage, or I'm going to kick your butt. Well,
I'm gonna call your mom.
Right, that doesn't work anymore. And so I wonder about our legislators who thought about accountability, and rightfully so. Accountability came about because we weren't holding ourselves accountable. We weren't evolving. We weren't changing. But we don't measure hope. That's an optional thing. People don't understand. You can measure the hopefulness of your students. And I will tell you that when it is the number one thing, if you said, what's one thing, if you had a limited budget, would you always do in any school you went, I want to measure the hopefulness of my students. 2013 Noble Local Schools, only 32% of our students were hopeful for their future. Defined as, I believe the future can be brighter than my past, and I have the power to make it so. Now students can tell you what their strengths are, what their aptitudes are. Through our work with business and industry, they know where they fit. Now 85+% are hopeful for the future. That corrects a lot of these problems with disrespect, lack of engagement, all those things. And I think that's what our goal has always been. But instead, in comes all these external accountability measures that are measuring things that are actually a sign of a void of hope. But so if we want this to improve, why don't we address the root cause? And we used to say, and I'll give Justin Dean his credit, he used the word Robitussin. Regardless of what your problem is, we give everybody Robitussin. Well, if we get back here to the hope piece, then we get to engagement. And we know that hope is a greater predictor of success after high school than any measure, ACT, GPA, any of those things. But nobody mandates us to assess and measure hope. Nobody does that. But that's the cause. Everything we see here is a problem. 30% of Ohio students last year were chronically absent. Wonder why? If you're hopeless and you're disengaged, well, why don't we address the root cause? But you know what our solution is? Hey, let's give you tickets to a ball game if you show up. Well, that external motivational work for a period of time, but someday it's going to be too cold to go to the game. I could care less. I'd rather stay here. But how about we address the root cause? And so that goes back to our system not evolving.
Okay, so true. Now, you just led me to the number 3 reason, right? Is teachers are leaving or want to leave because the bureaucracy of education, the cookie cutter approach, what you said, the Robitussin. And the thing about the role of teacher, okay, so sometimes when the mom or the dad have to tie their shoes, like Linda said earlier, like she's tying shoes, kids bleed, holding a bloody nose, kid throws a chair, mental health counselor, right? You're spending your own money out of your own materials. They say the average teacher spends $1,000 out of pocket, right? to these becoming your kids, right? As Linda shared earlier, she was crying, like, these are my kids at the end of the year. So you do all these things, and the state says, well, here's your test scores, you got to do this, this, and this. So people say, I got into this. I asked Linda earlier, and I'm asking what you did. Got into it because you wanted an impact and make a difference, right? Use the word hope, real stuff, like not. So now there's all this bureaucracy, right? And only 10% of educators today would recommend for someone to go into education. So that hope piece is missing. One is, and this is a whole different topic, but at what point and why would legislators ever think they should get involved in education they know nothing about, right? Every district, every building, wherever you're at, unique, and you have to serve the people when they change, right? But you have to serve who you got. But like you're talking about pathways. That's the exciting thing. There's hope. I do believe when you say I have to do this, and here's your test scores, and you da, and it's a cookie cutter approach. And I'm not saying it, not accountability, not showing growth, but growth for each kid looks different. And grades are based on the assessor, right? You and I could judge the beauty pageant, and my top two may be different than your top two. So we got these guys saying, well, and all these programs, and I can feel for some of these people saying, what do you want me to do? I got some of these parents that are struggling, they're cussing me out on social media.
Yep.
I got this kid that's tearing up the classroom every day. I'm the nurse, I'm the doctor, I'm doing this. The bureaucracy's ruining education to an extent. I don't think it's the sole point. I think it's all. I think the reason people are leaving is we dump a lot on a lot of people. Yeah. And you're asking sometimes, like for here, sometimes we take the most unteachable kids to teach them. We take the most unreachable kids to reach them. And a lot of times the most unloving kids, the most unloved kids ask for love in the most unloving ways. And so that's one thing to provide hope and to build that relationship. And then the other part is like, I got this kid, he came in, he's reading in the second grade level, he's in 7th grade, and you're telling me, I mean, that there is a level. So you've been on every level, teacher, administrator, principal, superintendent, now you're in higher ed, state. Talk a little bit about that. Like, what resonates with you?
Well, a lot. I will say this, and I've said this to some board members in the past, just because you went to school doesn't mean you're an educator. No more than just because you played basketball or football, that makes you a coach.
Correct.
But I will say that we in the profession have to take our share of the responsibility of why accountability measures were put upon us. Because too often we weren't evolving. We weren't holding ourselves accountable. Obviously some were, but by and large our profession was not evolving. And so legislators, I believe, out of good intentions, tried to force this upon us to help spur our innovation and to do something different. So it's kind of like in the void of leadership, somebody's going to step up. You may not like who it is or what it is. And I think we allowed that to happen. I will tell you this, we've always had good report card success. It's never been the ultimate driver. But I will tell you, I don't have to look at report card growth or measures if I monitor hope. Because I know with hope comes engagement. With engagement comes attendance. And you know what? That player comes to practice every day. Just by walking in that gym, just by the power of showing up, I've got a chance to do better. And there's never been a time that hope scores rose and performance didn't. It's just not. So I always had to pick, this is where I choose to put my investment. This is going to be an outcome over here. And I think when we do that, we find that relationships are better. Teachers feel better about what they're doing, because to get to this hope piece, you have to be aligned and you have to see that student's future.
But now, we have some districts, board members, again, unless you've taught, you have no business doing other than your role, right? But are upset or looking at report cards, and so then there's a push from the board to the superintendent to the principals, and none of those people have walked a day in these people's shoes.
No.
So a lot of people are leaving saying, here's my keys, you think you can do this better, you take these 25 kids, good luck.
Amen. And that's an issue too. So we had a recent changeover in Ohio, right, to the Department of Education and Workforce. We've kind of alienated the State Board of Education. And I've always been an advocate for that on a lot of fronts. But alienating the State Board of Education, we still have 605 other boards of education who sit in an effort to do their best, but their role is not to run the district, right? And that's the conversations I've had with board members is just because you went to school doesn't mean you're an educator. And I've had doctors and I've had law. Well, how would you like for me to serve on your board? Right? How much help would you have to trust?
I use that example. I mean, again, and school boards are awesome, and they're like my board. I'm blessed. I mean,
me too.
But there are people that don't. There are people that get on school boards for a hidden agenda. They want to fire a coach. They want a performing arts center. But again, me serving on the dental board would be of no use because I knew nothing about being a dentist.
Right. So it's good to have that community representation, but I think they have.
But at the state level, same thing. Like we got people who are making a cookie cutter approach. And so I feel the frustration for teachers, like, what more do you want from a principal?
100%.
And I do think it's harder today because, again, we are serving more trauma-based kids, which is my next point, right? Is that 99% of educators say they need more trauma-informed education trainings because they're not equipped to deal with this. So Johnny comes in, cusses you out 7th grade, pees in the floor, flips his chair out, and like, I didn't learn this in school. And what do you? And by the way, you want me to give him his STARS test, and he didn't pass the 30 reading guarantee, and 4 of them didn't pass. But I'm dealing with behavior. So do you want me to deal with behaviors and keep people safe? I mean, so again, I think all this, and again, this isn't a pity party. I'm an educator, right? But I think there's a shared responsibility of having expectations, having standards, being realistic, having some personalization.
100%. You know what? I've been blessed. 36 years, almost 30 of my 36 have been on the administrative side. And I can tell you, the number of quality educators that I've worked with far outnumbered those that maybe were less than desirable. And you're right. In Ohio classrooms today, I am confident that a large majority of teachers go in and they are doing great work. And like I said, 86% of the nation that was surveyed said, hey, we're very happy with what's happening in our public schools. But I think we have to keep in mind that how we sensationalize the negative through social media, and we let the voices of a minority appear to be the majority. And it's just not. Most people are appreciated. And I think, one of the greatest things that you can do as a building principal is give your folks autonomy. We always try to simplify the instructional approach by simple 3 questions. What do we want students to know? How do we know if they know it? How do we respond to those who don't? Period. And other than that, let's go for it. Let's have fun. STEM. I had a teacher tell me recently, well, I just think that we have too many initiatives. I said, well, name some of our initiatives. Well, STEM. No, STEM's not an initiative. It's the way we educate today. Right. It is, and STEM is a better way to engage folks. And it also is a great link between the hope piece, the aptitude piece, and the workforce of tomorrow. And so we've evolved, and evolution sometimes appears to be an initiative. And really all it is a new way of doing business altogether.
So do you think, we're talking about solutions, right? I mean, we want to make sure that we can put at least a Band-Aid on it or change the way we do business. One, I think of low pay, if teachers year-round schooling, to me, makes the most sense. I mean, one, if you try to, the other part is, I shared earlier, is if you worked out for 9 months and took 3 months off,
be starting over.
That's a stupid model.
So my hot button during the COVID is we're concerned about the slide, right? The learning slide. We have 3 months every year since the beginning of time. We've never once worried about it.
Never, ever.
So yeah, I mean, it's nothing that we haven't.
And then they say, well, we're worried about where these kids, they get their meals and stuff. Well, you're turning loose for 3 months. Yeah. I mean, and some of these kids, the environment, the structure, the routine, the normalcy, the relationships, the hope, they lose that hope. They lose a lifeline.
I shared, this is a funny story. If any of these teachers listen to this, they'll have a grin on their face. We had the calendar committee that met every spring, and I was in Petal, Mississippi, visiting a school district down there, and the next week was our calendar committee, and I sent a copy of Petal, Mississippi's year-round calendar. And it wasn't any more days
No, it's
that
not.
we're in session. It's how we schedule breaks differently. And then summer school, for students who need extra help, rather than that being a 2-month thing that happens in June and July, it happened periodically throughout the year.
Right.
So teachers that wanted to make more money could teach their 180 days and work on some breaks in a summer school that's now spread out through the year. And folks in that district were really having some great success, and the community felt really good about it. Well, when I came back and we started the calendar committee, I could just tell there was some, and the question is, are you going to try to propose it? And I laughed, and they said, hey, we get why it's a good idea, but please don't change it until we retire, because we're so accustomed to that. Well,
So I'm going to jump in. I proposed, not proposed, we to the interest of a 4-day work week. And they went crazy. They're like, oh, I'm like, you're not working longer days. It's just chunked up. And we were going to give Mondays off because studies show that Friday everybody's happy, right?
mm-hmm.
So 2 of the Mondays were going to work and 2 of the Mondays were there. I'm like, and they were like, oh, I'm like, it doesn't affect me. I'm here every day. 260, you're here, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm like, if you told me I could have 2 Mondays a month to take my kids to the dentist appointments or have an extended vacation or get my car fixed or whatever. So the same type of thing, that change.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody doesn't want to change the model, but like you said, it hasn't evolved, and then we have
It's
these.
antiquated. It's no
But
longer.
they're saying, well, the kids have changed. Everything's changed. Time's changed. If we don't evolve the
Except
model,
many of our structures.
absolutely.
And we keep trying to jam this in, and we wonder why we have conflict. Each one of these things play a role in the general perception and vibe and feeling that we have about school. We're trying to educate new students with new intellect and learning and ability aligned with a new workforce using an old structure. So, the structure was designed around Del Monte, Ford, and now we're trying to prepare for Intel and all these AI and all with this structure.
So to address the teacher shortage, I think that a lot of people are working less. And, there's a generation that says, oh, everybody's lazy. And if you can't work today, you got problems because there's jobs everywhere, right? But working smarter. People are working from home. People are not, the banks aren't open 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, right? You can online bank. You don't need a banker, right? Schools, the 4-day model, again, it gets into daycare and the old, but doing what's best for kids. But if we want to attract educators, if I can go be work at a dentist office and work 3 12s or whatever versus 5 8s, that's a no-brainer, right? So if I'm making a career choice, because this generation Dave does all this, right? Hey, what's up, man? Jen's whatever it is, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat. I can make money from here without leaving my couch. So I do think when we talk about if we're going to help solve this crisis, we're going to have to look at the model of how school's set up. But again, I tell people, you'll laugh. Got into education because I love kids and I wanted to coach, right? And found out that teaching is way more important than coaching. But long story short, I'm dumb, young and dumb. I'm still dumb, but just not young. And you get in that thing, and you realize, I said, I'm in education, and I didn't like school. I like sports, girls, gym, and recess. That was it. I said, I never said, oh, I'm so passionate about this chemistry class. Oh, I can't wait. I'd get up for a school workout, shoot free throws, whatever, throw balls, whatever it was. I didn't want to do any extra study. I got an education because I want kids. I think people, like you said, the hope, they want to work with kids. Mm-hmm. I want to help you, whatever it is. Your past different than this past, but I don't want this cookie cutter approach. And this whole thing of I got to have a kid, first, second, third, fourth, fifth period, they got to go to class, 2 period minute break, go to class, lunch, boom, 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 and expect 9 straight months, and then cut them loose for 3 months and say, we got these kids and their reading levels drop. Well, hell, no one's read a book. Mm-hmm. They haven't read since June 2nd.
When my youngest, my son, graduated 2013, there was always a group of boys there, and so school was over, and I said, boys, you just finished your your K-12 schooling, during your whole time, what was the thing you enjoyed the most, right? And it's all about relationships and friendships and all those good things. But what I found interesting was, what did you like the least? And a couple of these dudes are pretty big guys. And one guy here is not so big. He said, but we sit in the same desk all day long. And we're expected to sit there all day long and not move
and pay attention
and be engaged. And we still have the chairs in right. It's the most miserable situation. At 58, I go to a conference. I will stand 90% of the time because I can't stand to sit. It hurts. It's uncomfortable. But yet we continue to want to ram that down people's throat. And I think you're right. There was one other example, speaking about antiquated, and we're back to the hope piece. So when we started doing a lot of career exposure, job shadowing, we're going to go take a tour. We're going to, let's talk about what working at the plant looks like today versus when grandma and grandpa. Well, that's a great way for kids to connect and see themselves in their future while also learning about something that they're unaware of. But think about how many schools that I've worked with, it'll say, hey, I know we're supposed to go on this trip today, but we're going to take 10 kids, but I'm not going to allow 6 of them to go because they've missed too many days, they're missing assignments, they're doing it, so we're not going to let them go. So what we're really saying is, we're going to hold you captive, we're going to beat you into submission until you learn to like this, then we'll let you go see this, versus, hey, let me give you a glimpse of your future that might excite you, engage you, that we don't have these issues. But our whole system, we could talk, please let's do a podcast on grading practices. Our whole system was around compliance. You will comply. Our structure, listen, setting in rows didn't happen by accident. It was part of orderly operations.
Right.
And now we're talking about entrepreneurship, think tanks, all these different things, creativity, students being able to, make $1 gazillion from their device. And we're still expecting kids to sit this way, do these things.
And again, I think adult implementation, right? Well, I look at what I screw up and what I need to do different, vice versa. We have to let go and embrace the change. We're not going to sit there in early rows. We're going to do. People aren't working 8-hour, 10-hour days.
Well, think about this, Ramon. You mentioned COVID earlier. So long before COVID happened, students were going to college, they're going into the workplace, and they're doing online school. If you go to work, at Colgate, you might take an online training class. You go to college, I guarantee you were having an online class. But we still weren't evolving to prepare students for that. Many of us didn't do anything online until the pandemic hits. We shut down and we're like, oh my gosh, we got to figure this out. Well, in 2014, Shenandoah High School stopped hiring substitute teachers. Teachers started posting assignments when they were out on Google Classroom. Kids could report to a common area, do their assignment from their day, from their instructor. When the chemistry teacher's out, the substitute's probably not a master in chemistry.
You can video the lesson.
Right. So what it did, it allowed us to keep the connection between our regular classroom, who was the professional, that regular educator, and the students in a virtual format for a temporary period of time until that teacher was back from an appointment or whatever. If you had first period class and that teacher was out, you could do that from home. If you had 8th period, you could go home and do it later, right? Well, that was 6 years before the pandemic, right? But we should have been interested in online learning long before the pandemic because we saw post-secondary already turning to that. We saw the workforce turning to that. Well, I thought our job was to prepare you for a life after high school. But really what the archaic system only sets you up to play school while you're in it.
Right, because, again, we have to be proactive versus being reactive.
Right.
I mean, this teacher crisis didn't just get here, and now it's like, well, what are we going to do?
Right. Well, you think about the teacher shortage, and I can think of, we had a lot of PE teachers, but we had very few that were also health certified, and obviously we have a health requirement. Well, I remember we needed a health teacher. There was not one available. I said, this is awesome. Everybody's looking at me like, you've lost your mind. No, hey, well, students will take health online. And this will be the one class that they can take completely online, and it'll prepare them for where they work or wherever they're going to. This is awesome. This is awesome, right? We all prefer face-to-face. I prefer face-to-face. But this is a reality.
And it's
like, this is a reality. So
I do all my banking online.
Yeah.
On an app. Like, I don't,
Right.
So tell me, what's been the biggest change in education for you personally from day one when you got hired as a young teacher and a coach to today?
Well, there's been a lot. On one hand, I want to say there's been a lot. That was then on the other hand, when I reflect back, what frustrates me the most, there maybe hasn't been as much as there should have. But I think the shift from a cohort model of teaching students by grade level, by class, to more of a personalized, differentiated type of learning, that's probably been the greatest shift. It's probably been the greatest shift that I think we are still trying to make. It's probably where we need to spend a lot more time in our evolving. So on one hand, I would tell you, boy, seemed like there's been a lot, but on the other hand, not near as much as there should be. So one of the greatest frustrations I would have to say is, I think as educators, we need to lead change. We need to lead innovation, not be reactive, as you said. So my biggest frustration is we haven't evolved enough. And I always use the example, why did they call Wayne Gretzky the great one? And he said, because I skate to where the puck's going to be, while my opponents skate to where it's at. And, I still get, I get a chuckle out of, well, we're really looking at some 21st century learning strategy. Well, that's great. We're a fourth of the way through it. Thank you. So, I would like to see educators and education be the leaders of innovation, not the one that's kind of pulling back and pulling in the reins. And so one frustration would be there's been a lot of change, but not nearly enough as there should have been.
I mean,
that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I think for everybody, their perspective is unique, right? That's what I want people that have been in the trenches, and everyone's is different. I think that's one of the reasons we have a teacher shortage. We don't listen to people, and everyone's perspective is different. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you do have to listen to the perspectives of again, you have to listen to the good, but you also have to listen to the bad and somewhere in between.
Well, let's talk about that word a minute, perspective, because that's a frustration. We think that we're going to get through the day, right? If getting through the day is our biggest goal, right? We have some issues, but one of the things that slows evolvement and innovation is sometimes we don't provide people the opportunity to get different perspectives. And I will tell you, one thing that I've been fortunate, 36 plus years, I've been blessed with opportunities to have various perspectives. From my first job, every job I've had, I worked for superintendents or principals or boards of education that always encouraged and supported my travels to other places. Did a lot of work in Mississippi, did a lot of work at a place called High Tech High in San Diego. And those perspectives are important, because if we only see what's in our building or just outside our window, that's slow to change. But when you see how other people, Petal, Mississippi, we brought up how they're slicing up their 185 days a year differently, and the impact that they're getting from that, and then the feedback from the parents and now even the employees who maybe resisted at first, but they were willing to have those conversations and give it a try. And so I think perspective is important. And let's face it, a lot of people in our profession have been in a classroom since they were 5 years old. So our perspective of what we're preparing for our students for outside, as adults, we have exposure gaps just like students do. So being intentional and providing folks to have opportunities to gain other perspectives, I think, is really important.
Well, I think I use the word worldly education. And I think you have to dip your toes in the water in different places to understand. And, typically people only know what they want to know. So if you're rich and suburban, that's pretty much, a lot of people, that's what they know, right? Country club, play golf. If you're from the hood, and you're in Compton, you know that this is what you know the hood, you know the gangs. If you're rural in Iowa, and you're on a farmer, you know John Deere and all that stuff. And if you're in Appalachia, where we're at, limited. When you get worldly education experiences, I guess that's what I should. And you get to, then you can connect to so many more people, so many more ideas. And I think a lot of the hatred in education today is what you said. We have limited perspective. We have very unworldly views.
Mm-hmm.
And change, because don't change our schedule. You don't even know what it's like. You have never experienced it, right? And it doesn't mean you have to love it, but you do have to get educated. And I think that's from a state standpoint in Ohio, we got to look at what other people are doing, other states. That doesn't mean we have to drink their Kool-Aid, but you have to at least know what it is. And
in the fall, I made a trip to Danville, Virginia to see the Institute of Advanced Learning and Research. And the bottom line is, here in the Appalachian Mountains of rural Virginia, hard to get to, there would be nothing to suggest that Danville, Virginia, geographically should be the hub of innovation and workforce. What we saw there was just amazing. And actually, they were running 3 shifts of training for the submarine industry in the middle of the mountain. Incredible. And so what the guy said, and I think this is really worth repeating, when they started this effort back about 16 years ago, people in the Danville community said, well, all you're going to do is train our people, and then they're going to leave. He said, what if we don't train them and they stay? And he says, but here's what I think we can do. I think we can train them so well that eventually companies will want to relocate here to be closer to the source. And that's exactly what's happened. Now, here's what I found disturbing for everybody in Ohio. Getting to Danville, Virginia from Marietta, Ohio is not easy. The guy says to us, right now, there's 4 companies in this building from Ohio that drove here to hire our people back in Ohio. He drove past all of us to get there to bring those people back here to work. Because guess what? We don't have anything like that here. And so I think our state could also learn lessons from Danville. Here's what he said. He said, you got some great things in Ohio. Because I made 13 trips there. He says the first 3 trips were to admire. And he mentioned the work that had happened in Marysville and around the Honda plant. And we do some great things in this state. He said, but I went back the next 10 times to examine your problems so that I could create something that would fill those gaps.
Oh, examine, again, it's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to examine this problem and look at solutions so we don't continue this gap in 20 years.
Right.
Because the people that vote no for school levies and blah, blah, blah. If public schools go away and you charge, what are you doing with your kids?
Right.
I mean, this is a serious national epidemic. I don't think that the sky is falling. This isn't Chicken Little, but I think we need to be aware of those type of things. And, you bring so much. The thing that makes you a dynamic leader is there is no box for you. You think it's what can we do with what we got? I'm big on that. I realize we may not be able to do what they have right now. We have this, but what can we do with what we got? And are we doing what's best for kids? Mm-hmm. And I think when educators, I know you're getting burnt out, and there is a lot dumped on, a lot of different hats. Okay, however, when you go back to your purpose, if you have a purpose, like my purpose is to serve God and serve young people, and then you got to do what's best for kids, and that means making tough decisions with adults and kids and parents and community members or even board members. But we got to provide hope for people to say this is a great way to do things differently, not just because again, if your image of school was from age 5 on, period after period after period, sit in the same desk, well, I don't want to go do that again.
Well, think about how many times you've heard an adult say, "Man, I'm glad," to a student, "Man, I'm glad I don't have to grow up in your world. That's going to suck." Well, what they're really saying is, I'm uncomfortable with the future because my skills aren't quite equipped for that. But we're trying to hold them down. Well, imagine you're a new teacher to the profession, and that's the person you got to eat lunch with. right? So it's not just the students; it's the message we send to the new teachers who are capable of handling this differently. So we talked earlier about. Did you encourage your student or your child maybe to be a teacher or go into education? Would you again? My son's kind of in it. Actually, my daughter works now as a nurse educator, so I guess she's kind of. I encourage them to go into that field. I would encourage them today to go into that field, and I would do it all over again. But I see things differently. You talk about thinking outside the box. My board president for a long time, Ed McKee, would tell you our phrase was, "We threw the box away."
Right, there's no box.
But it made it for a lot of people an exciting place to work. For the people that didn't like that change. So it's funny, now workforce development is actually on the tagline of the Ohio Department of Education, right? But when we started talking about workforce development in 2013, they thought we had lost our mind. I just think our messaging, our hesitancy. So being 58 here, January, this month's my birthday. What I say to folks when I visit with them and work with schools and staff is I can no longer be content preparing our students for their future with my skills, right? And we have to realize we have to evolve. We have to be, we hear lifelong learning, well, so many in our profession are not lifelong learners.
That's a very, very valid point.
They're not. So,
and I think we have some retired, rehired teachers that, one I know personally, she gets upset. I had a conversation because she's been doing this for 40-some years. In her era, they stayed till 6 o'clock and they went home and made dinner and they graded papers till 11 o'clock and the weekends. And this younger generation, she's like, they just leave when the bell rings. I said, we do school differently. Your definition of work ethic is different than theirs. And sometimes working smarter is working harder, right? And it's just, there's a shift. And it's kind of how we ended up in this situation.
Well, what's the reaction? Think about what the reaction is to AI. Let's ban it. Let's police it. Let's outlaw it. Because we think it's just a source that will allow students to cheat. Well, my response is assess differently. But then what they haven't yet figured out is some of those tasks that are labor intensive, this can actually help you expedite that process and do it really, really, really well. I had a phone conversation the other night. I'll leave the details out, but the bottom line is the person was being considered for a job that doesn't exist yet. They asked the candidate to write their own job description, and this person and I are having this conversation about all these things you can put in that job description and how little time. 24 seconds while we're on the phone, from qualification to experiences to duties to all those things, and the legal code to support it, state specific, 29 seconds, the job description was written and it was flawless. That would have been something that would have taken hours before. When you think about lesson planning, unit planning, curriculum maps, it's maybe not the end all, but it gives you a great frame. So we can cut that time, those hours down that make the profession very labor intensive. We can use AI to our advantage. And we're actually working a lot with Dr. Wendy Hanaski from East Central Ohio ESC, and she does a lot of work around AI in the workplace as a segue into how we can mirror.
They do lesson plans.
It's awesome.
But I think in education, each building, each district, each classroom, you have to have three things. You have to have a direction, an alignment to that direction, and a commitment. And I think a lot of times in education, there's not a direction because there's so much asked, right? And people get overwhelmed, and I'm like, well, what do you want me to focus on? But again, that comes from each leadership style of what is the direction, here's the alignment to it, and here's the commitment to it, right? And what gets measured gets done. If you don't monitor, it doesn't get done. So you can't just say we're going to do this, and not have a system to measure.
Right. How would we know we were effective? As coaches, we had a scoreboard every Friday night. People got to watch and grade our performance.
They sure did. And afterwards, they had their own rubric.
I didn't like the rubric sometimes.
Right. No. So let me ask you something. Is you've been a guy of impact wherever you've been. I would say in Southeastern Ohio, you got to be one of the top educators that I personally know on different levels. What's the one moment or memory, I'm gonna challenge you a little bit here, that has meant the most to you?
Wow. Well, that's first of all, there's been many.
Well, you only get one.
I know. Well, I'm prefacing it by saying that's how much I love the profession. There has been numerous, and I think that blessing has obviously meant more than a paycheck. And I can tell you, there's I've lived long enough. Paychecks weren't always bad, so I feel very very blessed. Wow, I think of so many students, and I'll tell this story because it's humorous, and I'll be driving down the road later, and I'll think of 20 better examples. But I got to tell you, I started as superintendent at Noble Local. Had one of our employees say, "Hey, I'm singing karaoke at this place, not far from your house. Won't you stop by and listen?" I said, "I sure will. I'll stop by there and listen." So come into this establishment, and I see this gentleman sitting over at the bar, and I can tell he's looking at me, but I'm really not sure that I can place him. And he's got a big beard, and his hair's long, and obviously he just got off work, and I see him talking to some people, and I think, well, he's either going to come talk to him or he's going to try to whip me. That's the way it's going to go. And he came over, he said, "Mr. Leffingwell, do you remember me?" And I said, "Brother, I was just trying to figure out if I needed to run or I needed to try to remember who you were." And he says, "Well, I didn't have all this here, but my name's such and such." And this was a young man that spent a lot of time in my office when I was a building principal and assistant principal, and it didn't always work out well for him. It didn't always work out well for me. He said, "Hey, would you walk out in the parking lot? I want to show you something." I went,
Oh my God.
oh boy, here we go. And he shows me this new welding rig. Pickup truck, welding rig on the back. I mean, it is awesome. It's customized. It looks awesome. I said, "That is beautiful. I didn't know you became a welder." He talked to me about his experience. He'd even done some underwater welding down in Houston, and now he's back. He goes, No, that's not what I want to show you." I went, "Oh boy, here we go." He goes, "What I want to show you is in my glove compartment." Oh, I went, "Oh boy, now he's going to shoot me." And you know what he wanted to show me? His W-2.
No.
He shows me a W-2 at 22 years of age. He made about $118,000.
Yeah.
And he says,
"That's the good stuff."
He said, there was a lot of times I thought about some of the times we had. He says, but the one thing he said you would always do, he said that meant more than anything. Whenever I'd come back from suspension or whatever, he said, you always greeted me at the door. And he said, you always told me, whatever I need to help him make the next week better than the last week, all you got to do is say so. And he says, eventually I grew up enough, I accepted that advice. And so really saw a student that had a terrible set of circumstances growing up, but through education, it goes back to our why. Through our efforts, and it wasn't just mine, right? It was the teachers. It was the community of educators. What makes our profession great is we improved his life choices, right? Suspension wasn't the end of that kid, right? Not complying wasn't the end of that student. That student, somewhere along the line, got a glimpse of what his future could be like, and he knew through hard work he could make a great living. And I think that is great. Now, the funniest story I have to tell you is I just left Warren Local after 20-some years of being there. One morning, it's about 6 o'clock, and I'm getting gas. And I see this parent, a former parent of mine, that we didn't get along so well. And he says to me, he said, "Hey, I was out at Tink's Garage just this week, and we were talking about you." And he says, "We really miss that SOB." And he says, and I told everybody in the garage, he said, "Well, I never really liked him, but I could always trust him." And I said, "Well, Mr. So-and-so, I want you to know something. I didn't always like you, and I was pretty sure I couldn't trust you, but it's great to see you." And that's our profession.
That's it in a nutshell. It's the ups and the downs, the good and the bad. if you could change one thing or one solution to kind of, you can drink your water, man. We've been talking all night. One solution or suggestion to help address this thing, what would it be?
Oh, well, first of all, I hate the way that educators feel today, and all these factors they're multifaceted. But I think if everybody could just rally around the point that we do need to work to improve, especially those early years salary. I'd like to see, instead of a range, let's say, and I'll just pick, instead of a range of 32 to 100,000, because believe it or not, when you're in Appalachian, people say, teacher makes 100,000? Well, yeah, they did. Okay, maybe we see making that range 60 to 65 to 110,000. So
Shrinking.
we've got to address that beginning salary. How do we convince anyone to go pay an inordinate amount of money for college to come out and make $32,000? That's first and foremost.
So with that model, it's like some people have the stepping ladder, right? We don't have it here, but so I'm supposed to make more money because it's just.
I hate it.
So same thing as what you said. So LeBron James as a rookie made more than anybody on the team combined. Yeah. Some of those guys have been in the league 11 years. Everybody has a role, but it's not equal, right? Yeah. And I think what you said earlier, I want to hire the best person. Yeah. If that means that just like in the corporate world, if I can go get this teacher for $120,000 and it's the best in the area and I can steal it from somebody, why wouldn't I want to be able to do that as a district? Because who's it impacts our community, our kids.
And I think that we have to work with our associations and our unions to change that. And you know what? I could sit here and talk about why unions are good, not good. I can tell you that in 30-some years as an administrator, I never had a grievance because I always respected the contract. If I didn't like what was in the contract, I worked collaboratively with them to change it. But some of they're going to have to come with us on this. Because there's no way in the world that our expectations are less when you make 32,000 than they are when you make it.
It's the same,
right? So
the valuation is the same, right?
I agree, and I think that we also have to realize we are a customer service business, and students
we are,
and our business and industry partners are our primary customers. There is a direct link between starting with the foundation of literacy, identifying my strengths and aptitudes and skills aligned with a career pathway, and then whatever post-secondary training or education we need or apprenticeship, whatever that looks like, we have to realize that every student is on a personalized journey. They're our customer. They don't serve us, we serve them.
It is a servanthood profession. And
I'll just say Eric, if he's listening, he'll get a big grin on his face. He said, that first meeting in 2013, when you talked about students are our customers, he goes, I wanted to punch you right in the mouth. And I said, and the fact that you didn't see it that way, I wanted to punch you. I said, but we've landed in a great spot here, right? So I think when we rally around that, and we think about creating hopeful students with pathways aligned with their strengths and aptitudes that align with local business and state industry needs, we can't go wrong there. So I'm excited about it.
But the hope, you're a guy that's you create, you mentor, you establish, you motivate, you encourage. And that doesn't mean it's all rah-rah. There's grit with that too. But education has got to have hope for not just the clients who we serve, but for the workers who are serving, because without any teachers, we can't serve them.
Right.
So we've got to look at how we do things differently and taking consideration of there's some things that we don't do well as educators. There's some things that do not fit with the bureaucracy. There's some things that we need a little bit more accountability to help control some of these environments as well.
And just like our students, you just can't beat me over the head and scare me into complying, right? And one of the great things about when you focus on strengths, our tagline is, let's focus on what's strong versus what's wrong. That doesn't mean you ignore your problems and you don't address gaps and those things. But boy, we can really accelerate things when we focus on each individual's strengths, whether it's a teacher, a student, or what. And we build a climate that supports that. It is the most powerful work I've ever been involved in.
Well, it's the hope and the power of it all, of what you've done your whole career at the different levels, is why it should provide hope. People can come to this profession and you can truly make a difference.
Yeah.
Now, you may not see that. You may not see that light. Like you said, it might be 20 years from now. It might be 25. It might be after we're long gone. Some kid's going to stay somewhere and say, look, it might be in a bar, say, look, I was this kid, I had this teacher so-and-so that really changed the trajectory of my life. And, you know, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you professionally and personally. Appreciate you coming on here.
Appreciate
you know, we have to continue to look for solutions. At the same time, I have a real feeling for people in the trenches that it's not all rainbows and sunshines. And it is a tough job. And if you got paid $10 per kid per hour, you'd make a lot of money.
We wouldn't have a shortage.
We wouldn't have a shortage, brother. So, and you and I might stick around for another 30 years.
That'd be amazing. That'd be amazing. No, I appreciate you, and likewise, the work that you and your team does here at Foxfire. I've told you before, it's just amazing. And at the last STEM collaborative, you know,
Amanda.
Yeah, Amanda. Yeah,
Amanda Matthews, give you a shout out, my assistant superintendent.
Amanda was amazing, and she says, you know what, we do great things and we don't lock them up. And, you know, this is an example of where students that weren't successful maybe in another environment are finding their place, and they're finding great success here. And you're really changing lives, and you're really changing lives from students that might have been in environments before where they didn't really feel like, maybe the adults there didn't feel like they were capable of learning. And you and your team are designed and equipped to deal with that. You're just doing a great job. So I appreciate our relationship, and
appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Thanks, man. We'll have you back.